Rachel always said that dinner was the compass of a home. If we can sit at the table together, we can do anything, she repeated like a refrain, setting the cutlery with a kind of delicate ceremony. I wanted to believe her, though by 62, I had already learned there was nothing simple about gathering 5 people from different worlds and expecting harmony. Liam and Sean, my boys of 10 and 8, slipped into their seats with ease, still timid, but used to the cadence of my rhythm. If this story is resonating with you, if you can feel that tension in your own chest, I have a small request. Follow the channel. It's not just a click, it's a signal. It's you telling me, keep going, bring me more of this. Every single follow is a push that helps me continue to find and share stories that aren't just told, they're felt. Stories that truly stay with us. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Brendan, 16, and Megan, 14, entered with the weight of adolescence and rebellion, a stormy energy that filled the room before they even spoke. That night, I remember it vividly. Rachel had prepared lasagna. I've always loved lasagna. The smell of sauce filled the kitchen, and there was an attempt at lightness in the air, a collective effort to keep the meal from turning into a battlefield. Liam said something trivial about school. Sean laughed at a childish joke, and I encouraged him with a smile. Then Brendan, arms crossed, shot his words across the table like a dart. This is old man's food. I don't even like cheese. How can you eat this? Only an old man like you would. The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Rachel, embarrassed, tried to change the subject, but the damage was already done. Brendan didn't want to provoke for the sake of provocation. He wanted to claim territory, to reduce me in front of my sons. And it worked. Liam lowered his eyes. Sean shrank back. I drew a long breath, chewing my anger, and said only, if you don't like it, you don't have to eat. It wasn't enough, and I knew it. The truth is, I had always wanted to believe that kindness, patience, conciliatory gestures would be read as strength. Rachel used to say I had too good a heart, and I feared that was exactly what made me vulnerable. Deep down, I carried an old anxiety that I would be seen as an intruder, a man occupying a place without the right to it. Brendan knew how to dig into that fissure. The breaking point came days later, on a quiet afternoon. Sean was in the living room, playing with his favorite toy car, a small red Mustang, a gift from my father, carrying more memory than plastic. Brendan walked in, picked it up, studied it for a moment, and without hesitation, snapped one of the wheels against the edge of the table. Sean screamed. Liam came running, and I arrived just in time to see the deliberate cruelty in his act. Why did you do that? I asked, holding back the urge to shout. He didn't avoid the confrontation. He looked me straight in the eye, his voice cold, and spit out the words that still burn in my memory. You're not my dad. I don't have to explain anything to you. It was more than disrespect. It was the cancellation of my existence within that house. My throat went dry. A short vertigo shook me, as if the ground had given way beneath my feet. There was my weakness exposed. I had no authority, no right even to protect my own children under that roof. That night, after Rachel tried in vain to sew excuses together, I sat alone in the living room, staring into the silence. Liam and Sean were asleep, still teary. For the first time, I said it aloud. Maybe I was failing, not as a husband, but as a father. Because the kindness I had offered was not protecting my sons. It was serving them up for mockery. Something inside me broke then, a wire pulled too tight that finally snapped. I realized that if I didn't act, I would lose not only respect, but the emotional safety of my boys. Brendan hated me, perhaps always would. But Liam and Sean needed to know I could defend them, that I could build walls where none stood. I rose from the armchair with a decision as sharp as flint. I climbed the stairs, opened the door to Rachel's bedroom where she lay curled under the blanket, and said, "Tomorrow, everything changes." She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew I wasn't speaking in impulse. I rarely spoke like that. The next morning, I gathered everyone in the kitchen. Brendan arrived with sullen defiance. Megan still half asleep, Rachel tense. Liam and Sean sat straight-backed, waiting as though for a verdict. I drew a long breath and announced, "From today, all privileges are suspended. Phones, internet, television, everything. Until there is respect in this house. Brendan laughed, a short laugh, almost daring me. You can't do that. I looked at him calmly. I can, and I already have. But I didn't stop there. That same morning, I went to the hardware store and bought a new set of locks. When I came back, I replaced each knob, each key, every entry point to the house. Rachel watched in silence, torn between whether to support me or fear what was coming. In the afternoon, when Brendan tried to come and go as if nothing had changed, he found the door locked. That was when I said, with a firmness I didn't know I had, "You will go live with your father, Daniel, until you learn the value of respect." Rachel gasped. Megan cried. Brendan shouted. But I didn't yield. Their father's car came that very evening. The house suddenly felt bigger and emptier, as though silence had taken on echoes in the halls. Liam and Sean breathed easier, but the question lingered in their eyes. Would their siblings come back? Rachel cried in the bedroom, torn between pain and hope. I sat alone in the kitchen, the same table where I had so often been reduced to silence. Now I was the man who had imposed the law, and for the first time, I didn't feel cruel, only necessary. Block 2. The days that followed were unlike any I had lived in years. The house, absent of Brendan's sarcasm and Megan's sullen refusals, breathed differently. It wasn't peace exactly, but something adjacent to it, like the air after a storm that has uprooted trees but cleared the sky. Liam and Sean rediscovered their laughter. It rang louder in the halls, unmuted, no longer cautious. At night, they slept deeply, not waking with the creaks of the stairs or Brendan's voice shouting from a darkened room. It was as if a weight had been lifted, but that weight had been part of us too, and its absence carried its own shadow. Rachel moved through those days like a woman split in two. I would find her folding laundry with sudden tears or standing in the doorway of Megan's room, smoothing a bedspread untouched. She didn't reproach me, not directly. Instead, her voice carried questions disguised as statements. Megan hates sleeping anywhere but here, or Brendan has always struggled with change. I would nod, let her speak, and then answer with silence. I had no words for her grief because I was still measuring my own grief for what had been broken beyond repair. Grief for what could never return to innocence. On the third night, after the boys had gone to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. The overhead light cast her face into two halves, one softened by love, the other hardened by worry. "Do you think they'll come back different?" she asked. I took a slow sip of tea. "If they come back, they'll come back knowing where the walls are. Boundaries make us human. Without them, we fall into chaos." She lowered her eyes. "You sound so certain." "I'm not. But I know what I saw in Brendan's eyes when he broke Sean's toy. He wanted me erased. And I won't let anyone, not even your son, erase me from my own home." She didn't argue. She reached across the table, touched my hand briefly, and then withdrew, as if even closeness might betray her children. Meanwhile, news traveled quickly. In a neighborhood like our suburban Boston, manicured lawns, mailboxes painted with bright flowers, privacy was a fragile thing. By Friday, Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor 2 doors down, paused at the hedge and asked casually, "Rachel, are the kids visiting their father?" Rachel gave a polite smile, the kind that masks pain with propriety, and nodded. But I could feel the judgment seeping through, unspoken. To the world, I was the stepfather who had thrown children out of their home. And perhaps, in the cold arithmetic of gossip, that's exactly what I was. I carried that weight to work, though no one at the firm knew the details. At 62, I had scaled back my practice, taking fewer clients, but I still kept my small office near Copley Square, where I handled estate planning and tax affairs for families that reminded me, painfully, of what mine was not. Numbers were mercifully neutral. They did not sneer or refuse to eat lasagna. Yet, even as I worked through trusts and wills, I found myself scribbling phrases in the margins of legal pads. Respect is currency. Authority must be visible. Love without borders is weakness. I told myself I was preparing arguments for the next time Brendan stood before me, but I knew it was more than that. I was fortifying my identity. One afternoon, Daniel himself appeared at my office. I wasn't expecting him. He came without appointment, his tall frame blocking the doorway, his presence stirring an old bitterness. He had been Rachel's first husband, father to Brendan and Megan, a man of casual charm, a salesman by trade, who wore his failures like shrugged-off jackets. "Patrick," he said, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "We need to talk." I gestured to the chair, though everything in me resisted. He sat, leaned forward with the air of a man pretending to negotiate. "The kids are miserable," he began. "They say you locked them out, changed the locks. Do you know how that sounds?" "I know exactly how it sounds," I replied. "I also know how it felt to watch your son destroy a toy my father gave, and then spit in my face with words meant to cut me out of existence." Daniel chuckled, as if I were overreacting. "Teenagers. They test boundaries. You're supposed to let it roll off. And when the test becomes contempt, when it becomes a habit of erasure, no, Daniel, that's when you step in. That's when you say enough." His smile faded, replaced with something harder. "You're overstepping. They're my children." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of every gray hair, every line on my face. And they live in my house, under my roof, which means my rules. If you can't live with that, then perhaps you should consider what kind of example you're setting when you teach them that authority means nothing. We stared at each other in silence. Two men bound by the same woman, the same children, but standing on opposite banks of a river no bridge could cross. He finally rose, muttering, "This isn't over." He was right. It wasn't. That night, Rachel told me Daniel had called her. His version was simple. I had humiliated the children, treated them like criminals. She listened, but for the first time, she didn't echo his accusations. She only said, "I don't know how we hold this together." I told her the truth. By holding on to what's real, Liam and Sean need me. And whether Brendan and Megan see it now or not, they need me too. One day, they'll know it. A week later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brendan and Megan standing on the porch. Not defiant this time, but subdued, their shoulders heavy, their eyes averted. Rachel hurried behind me, her hands trembling. Brendan spoke first, his voice low, almost swallowed by the evening air. "Patrick, can we come back? We get it now." I didn't answer at once. I told them to come inside, to sit at the table. For the first time, I was not the stepfather begging for acceptance. I was the man setting the terms of his own dignity. And in that silence, in the weight of that moment, I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. When Brendan and Megan sat down at the table again, the house held its breath. Rachel hovered between relief and caution, her hands restless on the back of a chair. Liam and Sean watched with a child's quiet vigilance, sensing that what was unfolding mattered more than the food on the table. For a long while, no one spoke. The lasagna grew cold on the counter, untouched. Finally, Brendan broke the silence. "We understand now. We were wrong." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, stiff, rehearsed, as if he had practiced them on the way over. Megan added quickly, her voice breaking, We want to come back home." I studied them both. Brendan's defiance had thinned into something more fragile. Megan's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but I wasn't ready to let sentiment undo the lines I had drawn. At 62, I had learned that the love without form becomes indulgence, and indulgence becomes rot. "This house is not a revolving door," I said. "If you come back, it is under rules. My rules. You will not mock me. You will not belittle your brothers, and you will respect this roof. If that is too much, the door is open for you to walk out again." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, but she said nothing. Her silence was a fragile endorsement. Brendan swallowed, his eyes fixed on the table. "We'll follow the rules." So they returned. But return is not the same as restoration. A week later, Brendan was polite enough at dinner, but carried a stiffness in his shoulders, as if civility were a costume that didn't fit. Megan retreated to her room, headphones in, though I noticed she no longer slammed the door. Liam and Sean watched their siblings with suspicion, unsure whether the reprieve was real or temporary. It was during those weeks that I discovered something about myself. Authority, once claimed, needs constant tending, like a flame that dies if not fed. I began to speak with more certainty, not only with the children, but with Rachel too. I told her plainly when I disagreed, when her instinct to soften discipline clashed with my resolve. At first, she resisted, but slowly I sensed her yielding. Not because she feared me, but because she saw in me a clarity she could no longer deny. Yet clarity brought its own isolation. The neighborhood chatter had grown louder. I caught fragments at the mailbox, whispers that traveled with the breeze. "Did you hear? He locked them out." What kind of man does that to children? It did not matter that those same children had spat venom at me, broken what was sacred to my sons. Judgment was always a simpler story than truth. One evening, at a school event, a father I knew casually approached me, his smile fixed too tightly. "Tough love, huh? Word is you run your house like a prison." I met his eyes. Better a prison with order than a playground of cruelty. He chuckled nervously, but I saw the discomfort ripple beneath. People preferred the illusion of harmony, even when it was poison. My choice had made me visible, and visibility invites scorn. Brendan, too, began to test me again, though subtler this time. He no longer shouted, but his silences were heavy, his compliance tinged with sarcasm. One evening he muttered, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Finally getting to play the big man." I looked at him steadily. "No, Brendan, I'm not playing anything. I'm simply refusing to disappear." He didn't answer, but something flickered in his face, anger, perhaps, or recognition. The true fracture, however, came from Daniel. He called Rachel late one night, his voice carrying across the bedroom, even through the closed door. He accused me of poisoning his children against him, of using authority as a weapon. When Rachel hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed, her back to me. "He says you're turning them into soldiers," she whispered. "No," I replied. "I'm teaching them to be citizens of a home. There's a difference." Her silence told me she understood, but feared the cost. Then came the letter. It arrived one Monday morning, a plain envelope tucked between bills. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Daniel had filed for a custody modification. He wanted Brendan and Megan with him permanently, claiming my household was hostile and unsafe. Rachel read the letter, her hands trembling. "He can't do this, can he?" I took the paper, studied the familiar signature. He can. And he has. That night, Brendan avoided my eyes. Megan cried quietly in her room. Rachel wandered the kitchen, as if searching for something to hold on to. And I, alone at the table, felt the old vertigo return, the sensation of being erased, of watching everything I had built tilt toward collapse. But this time, I was not the man who sat silently and swallowed failure. I was older now, harder, tempered by battles fought within my own house. I knew the language of law, the power of paper, the way truth could be shaped not with shouts, but with documents, with strategy. If Daniel wanted war, he would have it. But it would not be fought with screams across a telephone line. It would be fought in the places where permanence is forged, in records, in testimony, in the quiet weight of evidence. And in that moment, staring at the letter under the harsh kitchen light, I felt a different kind of clarity, not just the need to protect, but the determination to reclaim dignity through precision, through patience, through the kind of revenge that does not announce itself, but waits, sharp and silent, until the exact moment it is felt most. The house was quiet, but inside me, something had begun to move slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The letter from Daniel did not leave my desk for days. It lay there, beneath the lamplight, a stark reminder that in the end, the battlefield of a family is not the dinner table, but the cold geometry of the courts. I studied it the way I would study a contract, underlining phrases, circling dates, noting inconsistencies. Daniel claimed my household was hostile, unsafe, that I was a tyrant imposing cruel discipline. He wrote that Brendan and Megan feared me. He used words like toxic environment and emotional abuse. I had spent 40 years working with documents, with wills and trusts and contracts that define the boundaries of lives. At 62, the skills had not dulled. If anything, they had grown sharper, stripped of naivety. Daniel thought the truth could be bent by language. He forgot that I lived in language, that I had made a profession out of turning words into architecture. Rachel tried to reassure me. "The judge will see through this. He doesn't know you like I do." But I shook my head. Judges don't see people, Rachel. They see papers. They see what is presented to them in neat binders and sworn affidavits. Daniel knows that. He's not trying to prove the truth. He's trying to write it. So I began to write mine. I pulled records from my office files, school reports, medical records, notes from teachers that praised Liam and Sean's progress since the house had quieted. I gathered receipts showing the stability I provided, the consistency of meals, of routines, of structure. I asked my secretary, quiet, loyal Mrs. Green, to notarize statements, careful to make everything impeccable. And slowly, a counter-narrative formed, not in shouts or protests, but in the steady accumulation of evidence. Order against chaos. Proof against hearsay. At home, the atmosphere tightened. Brendan withdrew again, suspicious of every move. Megan clung to Rachel, torn between loyalty to her father and the desire to stay where love, however flawed, was tangible. Liam and Sean sensed the storm, but didn't have words for it. At dinner, conversation stalled. The lasagna grew cold again, and I could feel history repeating itself, though this time I was not the man chewing silence. I was the man preparing. One evening, I found Brendan in the garage, sitting on the workbench, fiddling with a wrench. He looked up, his face caught between defiance and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" he asked suddenly. "Why can't you just let us go live with Dad?" I studied him, this boy almost a man, carrying anger that was not entirely his own. Because he doesn't want you, Brendan. Not really. He wants to win against me, and he's using you as the prize. He flinched, his jaw tightening. "That's not true, isn't it?" I asked gently. "Think of the times he showed up late, the weekends he canceled, the birthdays he forgot. Has he ever fought for you until now? Or is he only fighting because of me?" Brendan turned away, but I saw the thought land. A fracture in certainty. He said nothing more, but his silence was different, less hostile, more uncertain. Weeks passed and the custody hearing loomed. Rachel oscillated between panic and fragile hope. She whispered at night, "What if the judge believes him? What if they take them? Then we will have lost nothing," I said, "because children who are taken by lies eventually see through them. And when they do, they will remember who stood quietly, firmly, without hatred. They will remember where dignity lived." The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Daniel arrived in a new suit, with his easy smile, speaking of concern, of fatherly love suddenly rediscovered. I sat still, listening, my binder of evidence on the table before me. When it was my turn, I spoke softly, directly, without flourish. I presented records, letters from teachers, photographs of meals at our table, notes of Sean's laughter, Liam's calm. I let the documents speak, authority visible, respect written into pages. When the judge asked Brendan and Megan to speak, the room froze. Megan's voice trembled. "I just want everyone to stop fighting. I feel safe at Mom's. I feel safe with Patrick." Brendan hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and his father. His words came slowly. "Dad, he cares. But Patrick, he doesn't disappear. He's always there, even when I don't want him to be." Daniel's face darkened, a mask cracking. The judge took notes. No verdict was given that day, but I saw it in the stillness of the court, and the way the gavel paused before striking. Daniel had already lost. Afterward, Rachel wept in the hallway, clutching Megan. Brendan stood apart, silent, his face unreadable. Daniel brushed past me without a word, his cologne sharp, his footsteps hurried. Victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like survival. That night, back at the kitchen table, the lasagna steaming between us again, Rachel took my hand. "You saved us." I shook my head. No, I only refused to vanish. But inside, I knew it was more. I had turned the very tools of my profession, the patient gathering of detail, the careful arrangement of truth, into a weapon. Not to destroy Daniel, but to strip him of illusion. And that was its own kind of revenge, measured, precise, irrevocable. The children ate in silence, but the silence was different now. It was not the silence of fear, nor the silence of defiance. It was the silence of a family learning its shape, slowly, painfully. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the stack of documents, the echoes of the courtroom still humming in my ears. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, a low, steady sound. My phone vibrated once, a new message. I picked it up. A number I did not know. The text was short, almost casual. "You think this is over?" I stared at it for a long while, the glow of the screen pale against the dark. Then I set the phone down, folded my hands, and waited. Because I knew better than anyone, nothing is ever truly over. Not in families, not in love, and never in revenge. The message glowed on the kitchen counter, a single sentence that refused to dim. I kept the phone face down through breakfast, though its shape might as well have been a sixth-place setting. Rachel moved around me with soft choreography, coffee, toast, the small talk of someone trying to keep water from boiling. She kissed the crowns of Liam and Sean's heads, paused at the sink, stared too long at the glass she was washing. Brendan came down late, full of practiced neutrality. Megan followed him with a gaze that asked permission from every object in the room. The house was careful. I could feel it. And care, in the wrong quantity, becomes a lie. When the boys left for school, I picked up the phone again. "You think this is over?" No number, no name. The kind of sentence that borrows its strength from what it omits. I replied with nothing. Silence is a chess move, too. I went to the office on Tremont, half out of routine, half because paper, unlike people, still obeyed me. Mrs. Green greeted me with the comfort of consistency, a woman who had buried a husband and outlived 2 sisters, and who now guarded the front desk like a lighthouse keeper. Years ago, she had learned the stories beneath wills. Now she measured me with that same exactness. "You're thinner," she said, not accusing, simply noting the ledger of the body. "Busy," I answered. She nodded toward my door. "Your desk bites back only if you let it." I smiled because she meant be careful, and because I needed that said out loud. I closed myself in and began with what I know. Print the message, examine the paper, touch the edges of a thing until it admits how it was made. I used the office printer, then compared the sheet to others I'd run that morning. Under a magnifying glass, the one I kept for reading notaries. Seals. The yellow ghost dots surfaced, a faint constellation baked into the paper by the printer's signature. Every machine writes its own snowfall. I compared dots with a sample from home, a grocery list the boys had printed for school. Not the same pattern. Whoever sent the message hadn't used our home printer. That left a world of devices: Daniel's office, public libraries, neighbors' machines. It was a start, nothing more, but starts matter. I told myself I was hunting Daniel because the thought steadied me. He was the obvious author, a man who liked to weaponize charm, who rang at midnight to bluster, who had filed a petition born of image management more than love. But obvious antagonists are decoys. I have written too many trusts to know that the beneficiary you see is rarely the one who profits. At dinner, the quiet took on a new flavor, metallic, like blood in the mouth. Brendan asked if he could go to a friend's house that weekend. I told him yes, with a curfew. Megan offered to do the dishes without being asked. Rachel wiped the table longer than necessary, then stood in the doorway, as if preparing to deliver a line she did not want to say. "Did you get any more messages?" she asked, eyes on the floor. "Why would you ask?" "I heard your phone last night. I didn't read it. I wouldn't." She hesitated, then added too quickly, "I'm just worried." Rachel's history with worry was lifelong. She had mothered a younger brother through their father's bankruptcy, counted coupons under fluorescent grocery store lights while pretending it was a game. Her objective had always been simple: keep everyone afloat. In our kitchen, that instinct made her soften edges until the furniture lost its corners. I watched her face shift as she spoke, hope to fear to a cautious, practiced compassion, and I realized she was studying me for cracks. "One message," I said. "From Daniel?" "No name." Her lips pressed into a line that wanted to be relief and failed. "Maybe it's nothing." Maybe. That night, while she slept on her side of the bed, spine curled like a comma that postponed the end of a sentence, I opened our file drawer, not to pry, to remember. Marriage is a series of documents. Mortgage statements, insurance policies, the slim white envelopes of utility bills. I handled them like artifacts. Among them sat what had once felt like security, our prenuptial agreement, written in the rhetoric of fairness. I had insisted on it. Rachel had agreed with a smile that said, "I trust you," and a subtext that said, "I know how the world steals from women." I had tried to write both trusts into one document. No paper is that generous. The next morning, the mail brought a manila envelope with no return address. Inside, photocopies of 3 emails, printed with the smugness of someone who thinks paper makes lies solid. They were between me and a client, a widow whose late husband had left his business to a daughter from a first marriage. The emails were benign in tone and content, but highlighted passages, chosen with malice, made them seem like collusion. We can structure this, circled in pink. Leverage, underlined as if it were a verb for theft. A note at the bottom, cut from a magazine with a child's craft scissors. How many families are you dismantling this month? I felt the anger rise, then flatten into concentration. Daniel wouldn't do this too much work. Too precise for a man who preferred spectacle to detail. This was someone intimate with the tiny humiliations that live in domestic paper. The printer's hum. The way an envelope seals when too much steam has been used. The trembling glee of a highlighter used in secret. Someone who knew my rhythms well enough to wound me in my own language. I called Mrs. Green. She came in, closed the door behind her, and took the pages with the respect of a chapel nurse. We compared the microdot constellations again. The email's dots were not from my office printer. She frowned, then said, almost casually, "Your home printer, Mr. O'Connor, is the newer Canon, isn't it? The one Rachel wanted because it makes photo prints?" "Yes." She reached into her bag, produced a magnifier of her own. "Humor an old woman. Bring me something you printed at home." I drove back at lunch, took from the tray a permission slip I had printed for Liam, a recipe Megan had printed for banana bread last spring. Under the lens, the dots matched the emails in the envelope, exact twins. Our home machine had birthed the poison. I drove back to the office with a stomach made of sand. I wanted this to be a mistake. Some neighbor using our fi, a bored teenager, a glitch in the pattern. Denial is a beautiful narcotic until you need your hands free. I sat, and slowly, I let the conclusion enter my body. It did not explode. It settled, heavy, like a stone placed on a grave. Rachel had printed the emails. But why? Motives matter less than patterns. I reconstructed the last weeks like a ledger, the crescendos of Daniel's calls, Rachel's growing distance, her murmured fealty to motherhood over marriage, how she had said, more than once, "They are my children," and I had added, softly, "and mine by duty." She had accepted the courtroom victory with tears, yes, but also with an aftertaste of apology, as if winning cost her something she was not willing to pay. If she had sent the message, if she had curated those pages and posted them to me, it was not to destroy me, it was to tilt me back toward invisibility, to warn me that power, once claimed, will be taxed. That evening, I watched her at the stove, stirring sauce with a focus too narrow for stirring. Megan hovered with a question she didn't ask. Brendan shadowed his sister, protective in the way boys become when they sense complications they cannot fix. Liam and Sean played cards on the floor, their laughter an honest weather report. I joined Rachel at the counter. "Did you print anything at home this week?" I asked, carelessly, the way one asks about milk. "The school calendar," she said, "and the sign-up sheet for the choir bake sale." "Why?" I shrugged. "The printer's been leaving streaks." She looked up, relieved to be of use. "I'll run a clean cycle." Her objective had always been that, fix the minor so the major remains bearable. But as she turned back to the pot, I saw what I had not wanted to see, a fragment of pink highlighter on her thumbnail, the color of the circles around my words. She noticed my gaze, tucked her hands into the dish towel. Too quick. I slept badly, woke early, and did what men like me do when emotions threaten to unhouse us. I worked. I searched our email server logs, the home router's history, the shallow graves where data tries to hide. Between midnight and 2 a.m. on the night after the hearing, Rachel's laptop had connected to my office account through our VPN. Authorization, my saved credentials, location, our kitchen. She knew my passwords. Of course, she did. Marriage is passwords spoken in trust and, sometimes, used in fear. I went for a walk through the neighborhood to rinse the bitterness from my mouth. September in Boston carries a thin light, honest about the coming cold. Mrs. Callahan stood by her hydrangeas, clipping the dead heads with a care that suggested ritual. She had emigrated from Galway in the 70s, raised 3 boys, lost 1 to heroin. Her backstory lived in the tilt of her shoulders. Her objective, unchanging: keep the street decent, keep children accounted for. She looked at me with the frankness of the old. You look like a man negotiating with a ghost, Patrick. Maybe I am. Ghosts don't bargain. They want acknowledgement. Then they leave you alone. I wanted to laugh and couldn't. Instead, do you hear things, Nora? About us? She clipped, considered, then nodded once. They say you're stern, that you humiliated the older 2. They don't say you were keeping the younger ones from drowning. Who says? People who have dinner parties. People who need a story. She paused. Rachel came by last week with cookies for the neighborhood committee. She looked tired. She asked a lot about the courthouse. Did she? A mother will sacrifice her pride for her children, she said gently. Sometimes she'll sacrifice yours too. Back home, I found the printer still warm, a half-printed recipe on the tray. I opened the history, recent jobs listed in a tidy column. 2 nights ago, scan_email_bundle.pdf. My name in the autofill field. The machine remembered everything. Machines are faithful because they do not understand loyalty. I stood a long time, listening to the house. Footsteps upstairs, the weight and music of my family moving through rooms named after uses. Living, dining, bath. I thought of the day I had told Brendan and Megan to go live with Daniel. The steel in my voice, the tremor under it. I had thought that was courage. Perhaps it was. But this would require something else. Not rage, not banishment. The opposite. A stillness that forces others to hear themselves. When Rachel came down, I was at the table with 2 cups of coffee. I poured 1 for her, took mine without sugar. I know, I said quietly. She froze. To her credit, she did not feign ignorance. She lowered herself into the chair like a person descending into cold water. Her face changed resistance, denial, then a grief that opened like a bruise. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. I was trying to protect my children. By accusing me of dismantling other families. By reminding you, she whispered, that power can frighten the people you love. Her backstory pressed forward in every word. The bankruptcy father, the years of making do, the terror of losing custody to the charming ex-husband who turned attention into currency. Her objective now was to keep her children allied to her, and if that meant dimming me, she would. But even as she spoke, her expression shifted, fear softening into shame. I shouldn't have done it, she said. I know that. But when you stood in that courtroom so calm, so certain, I felt myself disappear. I thought Daniel might take them. I thought you might not need me. It is difficult for the old to admit surprise, but I was surprised by the last sentence, not the rest. Not need you? You are so good at being necessary, Patrick. She let out a breath that felt 20 years long. I am good at worrying. Worry is invisible until it isn't. I wanted you to see it, and I wanted Daniel to stop. By scaring me? By making you cautious again. By bringing you back to the table. Before you made the house into a court. We sat inside that confession for a very long time. I thought of the boy who had smashed a red Mustang. I thought of the man who had changed locks. I thought of the woman in front of me who had, with a highlighter and a printer, tried to drag the story of our house back toward an old equilibrium where I swallowed my own name. We will not do this again, I said finally. My voice was even. You will not enter my accounts. You will not send me threats as if you were the weather. If you are afraid, you will say you are afraid. You will not try to become the narrator by cutting up my sentences. She covered her face. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were swollen with that ancient mixture, love and humiliation. I'm sorry, she said. I believed her. Believing and forgetting are cousins who only speak at weddings. I poured more coffee because there was nothing else to do that did not involve the police or a lawyer, and because Daniel would love either. Through the day, I considered my response. Not punishment. The house had long ago had too much of that. Not forgiveness without cost those coins by only resentment. A third path presented itself, one written in the grammar I understood. Structure. If our house was going to survive, it needed a document neither of us could misread. Not a prenup, a charter. That evening I drafted it at the kitchen table, while the sauce simmered and the boys argued softly about whether aces beat kings. I titled it Household Covenant because both words were unfashionable enough to be honest. It named our duties and restraints. Passwords are shared by consent only. Discipline is agreed upon and executed by both adults. Curfews written, not assumed. Privacy measured by respect, not secrecy. I added what mattered most to me and to Rachel. You do not erase the other from the story, even when you fear becoming a footnote. I slid the pages to Rachel. She read, flinched at some lines, smiled at others, then picked up the pen. You love your papers, she said with a broken tenderness. Papers outlive moods, I replied. We signed. The boys watched like witnesses at a peculiar wedding. The boys wadding. Megan looked relieved. Brendan looked skeptical but interested, the way a student gazes at a rubric that might finally make the grading fair. I slept that night without the phone on the table. I set it in the drawer, as if putting a weapon back in its case. Near dawn, a soft sound woke me, a thud at the front door. I went down alone. On the mat lay another envelope, this time with a return address, Daniels. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of our household covenant, neat black lines across the bottom obscuring signatures. Scrawled at the top, in Daniel's unmistakable swagger. Cute. How's it feel to be managed? I turned the page over. Another line awaited. P.S. Rachel says hello. The ink was fresh. It smudged onto my thumb like a bruise. I stood very still, listening to the stairs creak awake. Upstairs, water ran. A door opened. Someone laughed in the ordinary way that makes a house real. The page in my hand weighed almost nothing, and yet it altered the gravity of every room. I looked at the signature, at the blocked-out names, at the return address that might be true or might be bait. Then I placed the paper on the table and began to set out breakfast plates with a calm so precise it felt like surgery. Because now I understood the rule I had forgotten. When a story refuses to end, it is because someone is being paid by its continuation. And I intended to learn who was paying whom. The kettle sang. The house smelled of toast. Footsteps neared. When the doorbell rang a second time, I was already walking toward it. The second ring of the bell carried through the hallway with the odd calm of inevitability. I opened the door to find nothing but air. A neighbor's cat darted across the porch, its tail a question mark. On the mat, however, lay another envelope, thinner this time, marked only with my name in block capitals. Inside, one photograph. Rachel at the courthouse, speaking to Daniel in the corridor, her hand briefly on his sleeve. No timestamp, no signature, only the frame. Intimacy implied where perhaps none existed. A tool of narrative, a weapon by suggestion. I placed it on the table beside the covenant we had signed the night before. Two papers, two versions of reality, and between them the space where truth refused to settle. Rachel descended moments later, her hair damp, her robe tied loosely. She saw the photo, stopped mid-step. Her face shifted not to guilt, but to weariness. He's playing you, she said quietly. He knows how. Then why touch him at all? My voice was level, but my heart had the pulse of a man cornered. She drew a breath, set her jaw, because sometimes it is easier to calm a storm by laying a hand on it than by building a wall against it. I didn't betray you. I managed him. For us. Her objective was clear. Persuade me that her gesture was diplomacy, not betrayal. But the photograph lingered in my hand, whispering its own caption, and my silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. In the days that followed, the envelopes continued. Small, deliberate intrusions. A receipt from a dinner Daniel had paid for years ago. A copy of a school newsletter with Brendan's essay circled. My father is the one who listens to me. And, once, a single page torn from Rachel's journal. That one chilled me most. Because if Daniel had it, someone in this house had given it to him. At night, I lay beside Rachel listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Some nights it steadied me. Some nights it felt like evidence. Love is not a flame that burns steady. It flickers, leans, questions itself. I would wake, stare at the ceiling, and ask whether devotion is proved by staying or by walking away before rot consumes the beams. Brendan became quieter, more observant, his eyes following me as if measuring what kind of man I was turning into. Megan hovered around Rachel, protective, suspicious of me. Liam and Sean, mercifully, clung to the ordinary, still asking for pancakes on Saturdays, still tugging at my sleeve with math homework. Their innocence anchored me, even as the ground shifted underfoot. I kept working the documents, tracing the envelopes, comparing printer marks again and again. The patterns blurred until I realized the proof was not the point. Whoever orchestrated this, Daniel, Rachel, some collaboration between them, was not aiming to win in court anymore. The new objective was corrosion. Make me doubt. Make the house echo with suspicion. Make love indistinguishable from strategy. One night, Rachel sat across from me, the covenant between us like a silent judge. "Patrick," she said, her voice frayed, "do you believe me?" I looked at her, the woman who had once taught me that dinners held families together, who had stood beside me in court with tears in her eyes, who had also underlined my words in pink and sent them back to me as threats. Her face was familiar, beloved, and unreadable all at once. "I believe parts of you," I said. "Enough to live with, not enough to rest easy." She closed her eyes, nodded slowly, and for the first time did not try to bridge the silence with reassurance. She let it stand, a wall between us. Weeks passed. The envelopes stopped. Or perhaps whoever sent them decided silence itself was the sharper. Life resumed its routines. School runs, office work, dinners where laughter returned cautiously. But beneath it all lay the unspoken question: had we survived because we were strong, or because exhaustion had brokered a truce? On a gray Sunday morning, as I raked the yard, Rachel stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. She watched me a long while before coming down the steps. She handed me the mug, her fingers brushing mine. A simple gesture, familiar. But did it mean forgiveness or strategy? Affection or guilt? I sipped the coffee, bitter and warm, and studied her face in the pale light. I saw the woman who had raised her children with ferocity, who had betrayed me with paper and ink, who had stood by me in court, who had perhaps whispered to Daniel in corridors I would never enter. All of it true. None of it enough to answer the only question that mattered. Do I still love her? The rake leaned against the fence. The steam rose from the coffee. Rachel's eyes searched mine with a patience that was either faith or calculation. I opened my mouth to speak, but the sound of the phone from inside the house cut through the air. A single ring, then another. The boys called out, "Dad, it's for you." I set the mug on the porch railing. Rachel's hand lingered at her side, as if waiting for a verdict. I walked toward the door, each step the weight of a decision postponed. The phone rang again, and in that ringing lived the answer I could not yet give. Perhaps love is not a flame to be measured, but a question to be carried. The call waited. So did she. Block 6. I opened the door expecting Daniel and found a courier instead. A boy with a wispy mustache and the solemnity of someone entrusted with adult secrets. He held out a padded envelope, had me sign a cracked screen, then trotted down the path without looking back. No return address this time. Inside, a cheap thumb drive and a note written in sharp block letters. For the man who loves paper. The cruelty of accuracy made me smile, thin and involuntary. I set the drive on the table and waited for the house to finish waking. Breakfast first. Toast, eggs, the choreography of plates. I was not going to let a thumb drive dictate my timing. When the boys left, Rachel gathered mugs, stacked them with a care that felt like stalling. "Another delivery?" she asked lightly. "Yes." "From Daniel?" "Unclear." She nodded at the drive, as if it were a beetle we could usher gently out onto the porch if we were kind enough. "Should we look?" "We will," I said. "Later." She swallowed. I recognized in her the peculiar courage of those who confess after they have already confessed. The relief is real, but so is the dread for the remainder. Brendan and Megan watched us from the doorway in that way children do when they are nearly grown. They pretend to be indifferent and catch every word anyway. I told them to get their backpacks. I kissed the crown of Megan's head. She held still. Brendan offered a one-shouldered hug, then shrugged at his own embarrassment. The door closed behind them with an ordinary thud. When I finally slid the drive into my laptop, a single folder blinked open. Courtyard. Inside 4 files. 3 were audio files named with dates. One was a PDF titled Hospitality. I clicked the PDF first. It was a scan of our household covenant, intact. No signatures obscured this time. In the margin, someone had scribbled, "Management tool." The handwriting did not belong to Rachel or to me. I recognized Daniel's swaggering slant. I also recognized the way the pen had paused over the word household, as if unwilling to grant the title validity. The audio was worse. The first file, Daniel's voice, brittle with alcohol and pride, speaking to someone who did not answer or whose answers were lost to the soft hiss of a bar's television. He recited our address like a threat, then laughed a laugh that broke in the middle as if it had slipped on its own oil. The second file, a whispering duet, male and female, conspiring in a cadence that might have been flirtation if the words hadn't been so dry. "Send it to him," the man said. "He needs reminding where he lives." The woman, "You can't keep poking him. He'll strike." The man, "He already did." The third file was a voicemail that had never reached me, recorded by a phone set on speaker. "Mr. O'Connor, this is Officer Linden with CPS. Call me back regarding an anonymous report." The message had no date stamp. The number, when I tried it, had been disconnected. I replayed the second file and listened not to words, but to breath. It is a professional deformation years of hearing the space between testimony and silence. The woman's breath caught on the consonants. She was afraid and careful. She was complicit and ashamed. It was not Rachel's voice. The tempo was wrong, the vowels too flat. Boston, but not Rachel's part of it. A waitress probably, or a neighbor, or a colleague. The man, of course, was Daniel. I had heard enough of him to recognize the swagger, even when it was trying for softness. I printed a transcript of the files. Paper gives chaos a spine. At noon, I drove to Mrs. Green's. I do not often visit employees in their homes. Boundaries are a sacrament. But she had long ago earned entry into the difficult chapters of my life, and she had a way of seeing that made me less stupid. She lived in a second-floor walk-up, painted the color of boiled eggs. The hallway smelled of bleach and lemons. She served tea, then listened to the audio in silence, her face a ledger that recorded without judging. "He's sloppy," she said finally, "but he's not stupid. He's trying to make you paranoid." The woman, not Rachel, I said. "No, but not a stranger to the family. She knows you. She knows the edges of you." "Megan? Too young. Too much breath. I'd wager Mrs. Callahan's niece, the one who helps at the caf, or perhaps the woman from the neighborhood committee, the voice that asks for volunteers because she won't." Mrs. Green had a gift for malice wrapped in lace. She sipped tea. "And what will you do with this?" "Nothing loud," I said. "Not yet." She smiled, satisfied. "Good. Men like Daniel mistake volume for victory. Let him mistake it again." Back home, I called Brendan and asked him to stop by the office after school. He arrived with a backpack full of unresolved physics and a face that pretended not to be nervous. I showed him the covenant, the return copy with Daniel's handwriting. "Did you photograph this?" I asked. He stared, then muttered, "I took a picture the night you signed it. I sent it to Dad. I thought it would calm him, show him we had rules." He said it was ridiculous. Then he laughed. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." He did not cry. He clenched his jaw the way boys taught by careless men learn to hide tenderness. His objective was clear. Be useful, fix what he broke. I sent him to the kitchen to make tea for Rachel and me. Useful can be medicine. When he was gone, Rachel entered, already bracing. I set the drive on the table, pressed play on the whisper file, watched the color leave her face. "Not me," she said. The firmness in her denial surprised me. It was a clean line, not a defense. "I know," I said. She nodded once. A woman handed back her name. "Then who?" "The question is not who spoke with him," I said. "The question is who benefits when I don't trust you. The question is who wants this house to burn so he can blame the ashes on me." We sat with that. An answer suggests itself, but answers, in families, are rarely sufficient. Evidence is crueler and kinder. It does not care whom we wish to absolve. My revenge, if that is what it was, did not arrive as a blow. It arrived in envelopes. Public records, printed and arranged. Daniel's tax filings, pulled from a database open to anyone who knows where to look. His business license, long expired, copied from a state site that never updates front pages and always updates the underbelly. Child support receipts paid late, then paid in cash. Airline points statements obtained through a password he had used on an old fundraising site and never changed. A sin against caution, not law. None of it was a weapon alone. Together, they wrote a character. I composed a packet labeled with the quiet grammar of institutions. Compliance inquiry. I sent it not to the court, never to the court. The court is a stage, but to Daniel's employer's HR department and to the small, stubborn state office that investigates fraudulent claims indirectly related to tax credits. I did not accuse. I asked questions that came with footnotes. I requested clarifications. I provided documentation he would have to answer with other documents, in other rooms, on other mornings. My intention was not to ruin him. I will say that plainly. My intention was to strip him of the time he used to perform havoc in my home. He called me 3 days later, not to shout, to negotiate. The voice that had swaggered through bars now measured its syllables like medicine. I don't know what you think you've done. I haven't done anything, Daniel. I've asked for clarity. You value clarity, don't you? We can make this all go away if you stop the Saint Act. This will go away when it is resolved by the people whose job it is to resolve it. Not by me. Not by you. A long exhale. Ben, you're gonna lose her, you know? This strictness. Women don't love men who run houses like spreadsheets. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. He wanted me to plead. I let the silence do the work. He hung up before the silence convicted him. That night, Megan knocked on the office door before entering. She sank into the chair opposite me and folded her hands in her lap like a penitent. I told Dad I wouldn't talk to him for a while, she said. Her voice was small, not childish, but the size of what she could carry. He told me I was choosing you. I told him I was choosing me. She had always been the child I feared wounding, the one whose allegiance to her mother was not a tactic but an organ necessary for survival. Her objective had shifted from pleasing to belonging. She cried, then stopped herself, then cried again. Emotional progress is rarely linear. I told her I was proud. She let me say it twice. It was Brendan who surprised me most. He came in later. The house the quiet kind of loud it gets before bed. He stood at the shelves, pretending to admire my father's old ship in a bottle, then said without turning, "You're not going to leave, are you?" It is a dangerous question to answer. I answered it gently. Not tonight. He nodded, relief blooming in his shoulders. Good. I hate sleeping with my shoes on. Why would you? In case we had to go to Dad's again, I figured. He asked when it's inconvenient for him, so it'll be inconvenient for us. He paused. I was mad at you because you made me feel small, but I think I was small. I don't want to be small anymore. We are taught to hide the moments that redeem us, lest we appear sentimental. I will not hide this one. I put my hand on the boy's head and left it there until he brushed it away, embarrassed and pleased. In the days that followed, the neighborhood adjusted. Mrs. Callahan waved with less worry in the gesture. The woman from the committee stopped avoiding me at the mailbox. There were new rumors, naturally, that Daniel had problems at work, that he would be traveling to handle some things, that he had asked to postpone weekends with the kids until the situation stabilized. We did not gloat. We did not speak of it to the children, except to say that schedules would change. Rachel looked at me the way a person looks at a keel, recognizing the thing that keeps the boat from capsizing, even when it cuts through water with a quiet unkindness. And yet, the return address on the earlier envelope stayed on the counter, a square of paper that hovered between evidence and taunt. When I held it, the ink bled slightly as if the letters did not want to be permanent. Daniel had obtained our covenant from someone, but not from our printer. He had formed alliances in rooms where laughter is a strategy. I could trace them. I could burn them. I had not decided. One evening, after the boys fell asleep, Rachel and I sat on the back steps. The night smelled of damp earth and cut grass, Boston's early autumn performing its gentlest tricks. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. We spoke of ordinary things. The parent-teacher meeting, the price of milk, the ache in my knee that had begun to announce rain a day early. The ordinary is not innocent. It is where the soul consents or refuses. Do you hate me? She asked at last, not looking up. No, I said, and knew it to be true. Do you still love me? She turned then, and in her face I saw the woman who had once counted coupons under fluorescent light, and the woman who had weaponized a highlighter. Both were true. Both were true. Both asked to be forgiven without erasing what they had done. I did not answer immediately. Love at my age is not a declaration. It is a ledger balanced across seasons, a discipline more than a fever. I thought of the covenant on the fridge, of Daniel's note, of the thumb drive in my desk, of Mrs. Green's tea, of Brendan's shoes by the bed, ready for flight, now finally kicked far under, as if the boy had allowed himself to be unprepared. I thought of Megan choosing herself. I thought of Liam and Sean growing up here, learning when to speak and when to keep company with silence. "I'm here," I said. It was an answer and not the answer. She nodded, and for a while we listened to the night practice breathing. Later, after she went to bed, I laid out 2 envelopes on the kitchen table. One addressed to Daniel's HR, containing a final set of clarifying questions, each footnoted, each polite to the point of cruelty. The other addressed to a liar whose card I had kept in my drawer for years without admitting to myself why. I placed a stamp on one envelope. I did not on the other. I left them there under the modest lamp, side by side like sleeping animals, and turned off the light. In the dark, my phone buzzed once. A new message. No number. No name. "Are we finished?" I did not type a reply. I did not leave the phone on the table. I put it in the drawer with the covenant and the thumb drive and the spare keys. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Rachel shifted in her sleep. Or perhaps she was awake, waiting for me to choose the word that would write the next chapter. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened to the house speak in the mild grammar of its sounds. Then I took one envelope, and only one, and walked out into the night. Thank you. Thank you for staying with me, for listening this far. Your attention is a rare and precious gift. These minutes you've spent here mean the world. And if this story meant something to you, if it touched you in some way and you feel it might stay with you, then please do this for me. Follow the channel. Every follow, every subscription is more than a number. It's a silent pact. It's the fuel that allows me to keep bringing you stories that have depth, that have truth, that linger.